Sup. You know, I don't think most people really kind of expect that the Legacy sequel is a good idea. But, you know, I guess when done right, sure, why not? Like, you've got probably, I'd say the first one that comes to mind as to what was like the initial icebreaker for the Legacy sequel, something that was a direct sequel to a film that was, you know, probably pretty good in its day. Maybe it made a lot of money, maybe it didn't make much money, but it was, you know, has maybe had some critical acclaim, or has a cult following, or has since gained critical acclaim per versions and different releases. And the main one, as a first one that comes to mind, is usually Tron Legacy. And, you know, it gives you a pretty standard formula in a way to work with, where you start with brand new characters that are some way related to the original or not related at all, but then will become related to the original. In this case, it's the main character from the first film's son, and his dad has been missing for a while. And hey, look, I get zapped into Tron game, and look, Tron is now like updated with like 2010 special effect and Daft Punk, and it looks cool as shit. And look, it's my dad, but he's made of CGI. Doesn't look like it's aged well, but the, you know, contextual reason for why he looks such a way is doable, is a decent excuse. And then, oh look, my actual dad's here, and he has like a kind of hot daughter girl who's like not exactly his daughter, but like, so it's not exactly my sister, so I can kind of date her. And she looks like Olivia Wilde. And yeah, you know, good shit all around. Some fights, stuff happens, pretty good stuff. And so it didn't exactly like immediately spawn like, oh yeah, we can do all this and that and whatever. Like, Indiana Jones had previously come out, the Kingdom Skull one, Kingdom Skull? The Crystal Skull, that's the one. You know, the one that nobody likes apparently. Something I still don't understand. But I wouldn't dictate that as a Legacy sequel, mostly for the factor of it's a fourth film. It tries to do a setup as well, whereas the Legacy sequel doesn't exactly want to do a setup. Like, it's more of a, hey, we're kind of just chilling, and we kind of want to just do something, and we'll see what happens. So you got Blade Runner 2049, a film that's a sequel in every element, to the point of being a box office failure, and despite being a critical darling and everyone fucking loving it, and it being one of the most beautiful films of all time with an amazing score, and just nobody watched it apparently, or not enough. I apparently didn't see it enough times in cinema. I saw it like 3 times. Anyway, and so you've got something like that. You've got what's another one? See, I had to write a list. See, is it weird that the only two I can really remember is Tron Legacy and Blade Runner? Oh yeah, so you've got Doctor Sleep, which is an interesting one, because it's like that one being based loosely off the book, which is a sequel to the original book of The Shining, and then, but the movie is like, oh, what if, you know, we actually get someone who's better to make a movie? Not as in, like, in contrast to Stephen King, Stanley Kubrick, but in contrast to Stephen King, because apparently the Doctor Sleep book is not very good. But then it's like, oh yeah, we're going to get Mike Flanagan, who's like really fucking good at making Stephen King adaptations, and he makes a fucking banger of a film, which I still have not seen the director's cut, but I've only seen the theatrical cut. I know, boo me. But at the same time, hey, also underperforms at the box office. Not exactly, I wouldn't exactly pin it as a critical darling, but it's definitely a fucking fantastic film. So, you know, for those who have seen it, especially the director's cut, really like it. Most recently, you've got something like Top Gun Maverick. I literally just saw it in cinema. I wanted to wait to make this video to talk about it in a way. I don't exactly need to talk about it. Like, the only other one I had on this list was basically Prometheus, which is weird. It's a weird one. People still kind of categorize it in the Legacy sequel because it's a Legacy film to some aspect, despite it being one that precedes, you know, 4 other films depending on which canon you prefer to follow. I'm a extended cut of the first three, thank you very much. Not of the first one, but of the second and third one. Which means Ripley dies. That's it. Anyway, it's a prequel, so there's something different there. And it has since, of course, garnered its own sequel, and that one's really bad of an example. Not just because, like, it did well money-wise, but then, like, it was pretty mixed in terms of reception. More people like it, but then some people don't like it, and it depends on who you ask, really. I really like it. I like a lot of movies. But then it did still get a sequel, because it's still set up for a sequel that was completely not what anyone expected, and has since basically gained a cult following because not many people liked the sequel. Hell, I hated the sequel, Covenant, when it first came out. I've loved it ever since, if you look at it as what it's meant to be, a mad scientist movie. Hey, come here, scientists. Let me experiment on you. It's going to be great, I promise. So, it's probably not a great example of the Prometheus one, but I do like to consider it in that element, because it's like, it kind of tries to do a reboot sequel, but it's not making the same film as Alien, and it's not a sequel, it's a prequel, and it's just different. I don't know, it's like a better version of the Star Wars prequels than the Star Wars prequels were, in which to say, it looks fantastic, and it's not cringy as shit dialogue. Sure, the scientists are a bit kabuki, but at the same time, it's like, I don't know, given the circumstances, I think that, still morons, but, who cares? If they want to employ a guy who smokes weed in a fucking space helmet, that's on them. I mean, look at him, he's got a mohawk. But then, of course, we've got the main ones. The ones that are follow-up as a direct sequel, 30 years later. Let's see what we can pull out of our ass. And for the most part, they've actually been really fucking good. Like, most of the Legacy sequels that haven't done well, that I can't think of for some reason, are the ones that have tried to do a series, have tried to reboot a franchise, Independence Day, that's a good one. That's one where it's like, oh, we're just going to remake the same movie and then expect that everyone will see it because it's name brand recognition, despite not having the name brand of the movie was Will Smith, not Independence Day. Not really. Like, it's just a holiday movie kind of deal, as they always are. But you gotta have your name power. And there was no one to fill that slot. Who the fuck cares about Liam Hemsworth? Miley Cyrus clearly doesn't anymore, so why the fuck should we? So, that's a movie that was just terrible to watch. And in all fairness, the original's not a fantastic movie. It's fun, but it's a Roland Emmerich movie. It's only going to be fun. It's not going to be something that's like the most, it's not Blade Runner, for fuck's sake, Not to mention the fact that it actually did well at the box office and has decent enough reviews, just in terms of, it's not a fantastic movie, but it's not terrible, It's watchable. It's a popcorn flick. But still. Yeah, and so you get all that fun stuff. It's a lot of fun stuff. But that's a movie that still, it wanted to have sequels, Like, a lot of people tried to pin the Legacy sequels onto stuff like Star Wars The Force Awakens, but then it was still a trilogy. It was still designed to have sequels. There was no, The Force Awakens has a start and end point. It doesn't have an end point. The end point is, we're going to make 2 more movies. At least with the original Star Wars, it's open-ended enough with the Darth Vader going off into space, but, like, because, of course, I know, it was the first of the series that was released. Of course they had to have some kind of wrap-up for it. Yeah, I understand that. It was designed that way. And that's why it fucking works. That's why when you get to the second one, you can do something different, because the openness is literally endless. Not just, oh, we're going to end with Luke getting his lightsaber back, and just nothing can happen between here and the start of the next movie. And that's not a great way to start your trilogy. So, yeah, good job, Star Wars. I still really like The Last Jedi, but, like, holy fuck did JJ fuck it. But yeah, legacy sequels are interesting because again, they don't always perform amazingly. Like Top Gun might underperform at the box office. I have no idea. Do I want another Top Gun? Not really. Did I want a second one to begin with? No. Even looking at the trailers, it looked like it didn't interest me at all. 2 years of trailers, and I had no interest to watch this movie. And it wasn't until the reviews started coming out, and everyone was like, "Holy shit, this movie's really good!" And I was like, "All right, fine, I'll watch it." And I gave it 4.5 stars because it was a fucking banger. Top Gun, banger. Tron Legacy, retrospectively, banger. Blade Runner 2049, masterpiece. It's just like, maybe some of these movies are actually pretty fucking good. Now, it doesn't, of course, invite that we should always be, remaking or doing some kind of a legacy sequel. Sometimes the films, if they can have, it's one of those things like, oh, if they have a good idea, then maybe we could pull it off. It's like, yeah, you said that about Toy Story 4, and yet you're making Toy Story 5. I don't believe anyone anymore. You just want the money. Now, sure, I still really like Toy Story 4. Do I still prefer the first two over the second two? As in, 1 and 2 over 3 and 4? Fuck yes. Because they're fun, rewatchable movies. 3 and 4 are too depressing. Holy shit. I don't care how good they look. I don't like crying. I say that almost ironically, having just seen Top Gun Maverick. I didn't cry. I can't cry. But almost I wanted to. That was emotional shit. I would have thought Top Gun would make me fucking emotional. What the fuck is going on these days? I mean, I don't even give a shit about the first Top Gun. I never did. I've seen it twice, maybe, and I have not given a shit. I think the first time I watched it, I'm like, it's alright. And the second time I watched it, I was like, this movie's so gay. It's not a bad thing. It's just really obvious. I just love making fun of it too. Like to the point of when family members or friends are watching it and they're like, I can point out wow, look how gay this is, and they're like, it's not gay. It's like, just because it's masculine doesn't mean it's not gay. They're allowed to intertwine, Sometimes it's a good thing. But yeah, it's interesting, because it's like, I'm looking at, obviously there's a lot of films on the shelf, and there's a lot of films that have gotten sequels that have been unwarranted, unasked for, undeserved, and have usually been pretty shit. Most of them are just for the cash grab's sake. American Psycho 2, Basic Instinct 2, Something Else number 2. I don't know, there's a lot of movies that's very surprising that they have sequels to them. And it's interesting looking, again, you look at the shelf and you think, geez, I wonder what of these movies would I like to see some kind of a sequel. Like a legacy sequel, a film that's from probably the pre-90s. Sorry, I got a really bad cough right now. The Thing tried it. They went with the legacy prequel element to make it a little bit different, to be like, oh, we're not going to remake the film, we're going to make it a prequel based on a Norwegian base. But it's still in the continuity. It's not a great movie. It's not a well-deserved movie, a well-warranted movie. Maybe, sure, if the, special effects had have been less CGI'd to death, maybe we'd look at it more fondly. But it still it's no John Carpenter film, you just can't beat the masterpiece that is The Thing. Because, of course, there's legacy sequels, but there's obviously legacy remakes as well. Well, not really legacy, are they? Legacy means that there's some kind of a connection to the original one that fuels the narrative of the new one, Blade Runner 2049 does it vaguely, you've got the world building from the original, and then you've got the Deckard stuff later in the film. But, the underlying plot, the mystery and everything, still relates to the characters from the first film. But then you got something like, say, The Blob, for example. Obviously, there's the 50s version, and you got the 80s version. They have no relation whatsoever. You're not going to have Steve McQueen popping. I'm pretty sure he was dead by that stage, but he wasn't going to pop up in the 80s version as a, hey, look, it's me. I remember fighting this blob 30 years ago. This doesn't happen, That's a good movie. That's a very good movie. Both blobs, actually. But that's a different kind of area where it's oh, we have a movie from the 50s. Let's remake it because it's the 80s now and we can have better special effects. And, yeah, that was worth it. I've done a video on that before. We've talking about The Fly, The Blob, and The Thing. The 80s remake trilogy, as I like to kind of call it. Because they're the better versions because they remake the originals and they're done with very creative visions and they're fucking masterpieces of films. But yeah, I don't really know what else really there is to say. Like if I look up Legacy sequel, give me some talking points. A legacy sequel is a work that follows the continuity of original works, but takes place further along the timeline, often focusing on new characters with the original one still present. Yeah, see, that still makes it seem like the Star Wars kind of thing is, in it. And it's a big thing now to do legacy sequels. They're still few and far between, which kind of makes it seem like, not a lot of movies should have sequels, especially direct sequels, unless they, have something to say or something to add. It depends. See, this is going to talk about... so after Hollywood dipped its toe in the water more than a decade ago with Tron Legacy and Scream 4. See, Den of Geek is saying that Scream 4 is a legacy sequel. And realistically, I guess you could say it is. Like, even with the new Scream 5... But that's not my type of legacy sequel. Where that legacy sequel is we have a built-in franchise of built-in characters. We're going to make another one. And sure, I mean, it works for what it is. I don't mind Scream 4. It's an alright film. And the new Scream is also an alright film. Probably better than Scream 4. Not hard to be a better film than Scream 4. But as long as you're better than Scream 3, you're pretty good in my book. Scream 2 is still the best, so suck on that. But it's like, when you go to... I don't think, like, a franchise should have, should have its own... I feel like that should have its own bracket of legacy sequels, where it's based on, or a sequel to multiple other films, hence why I mentioned Prometheus earlier. It's in a different avenue. It's not a direct sequel to a one-off standalone film like Top Gun and Blade Runner. We're actually doing it as a sequel to a series of movies. But of course, God, Top Gun came out 36 years after its predecessor. 36 years. That's insane. What other movies did I mention? So I mentioned Scream 4 and Tron Legacy. Mad Max Fury Road, that's an interesting one, because that's like legacy sequel in terms of like, still in the books of, like, Scream 4 and Star Wars, but it's, like, it's kind of like a reboot? Like, what one is it a sequel to? It's not really, for me personally, it doesn't feel like a sequel, it just feels like another movie in the universe, but it just has Max with a different face. It doesn't really do much in terms of, like, as a sequel kind of deal. I don't know, it's interesting. Yeah, I wouldn't really pin that as a legacy sequel, personally. I know it's like 30 years after the original, it's technically a sequel, but, but then you've also got something like Jurassic World, which is like, yeah, but that comes after, like, again, from my own looking at it, it's the specific delineation between the two. Standalone gets a sequel 30 years later, franchise gets a sequel 30 years later. So Jurassic World is in that ballpark, but the Jurassic World films fucking suck. Like, the original trilogy is great. So, I'm happy with the original trilogy. Jesus Christ. Creed is an interesting point. See, that's at least one where they've tried a different franchise from it. A different, it's still got Rocky in it. Even the second one still has Rocky in it. But it's not solely focused on Rocky. But then realistically, it's so focused on the legacy of Rocky that you can't strip it from it at all, like, at all. So you can't have Creed without Rocky, and you can't have Creed 2 without Rocky 4. So, was it Rocky 4? I'm pretty sure. But yeah. Yeah, Star Wars Force Awakens, of course, Independence Day Resurgence. Blade Runner 2049, beautiful fucking movie. Cult classic. Not a box office darling, unfortunately. Jumanji, Welcome to the Jungle. Now, that one I don't think about at all. But I would, yeah. That one's a bit different, because it as a film rounds itself out just in case it doesn't perform well. But it's also one of those, The Rock, Jack Black, Kevin Hart, Karen Gillan. You got 4 stars that people are going to want to see it with. Like, I wanted to see it because of Karen Gillan. And it made enough money to warrant a sequel. And I don't even know if they're making a third one which is weird because they set up a third one at the end of the second one. And I'm like, is it because of COVID that they just haven't had the time to make it? Is The Rock too busy making these terrible Netflix movies? Probably. So, but that's a decent legacy sequel. It doesn't really have much to do with the original. It vaguely references, Robin Williams' character from the original, but it's still an interesting idea to be able to be like, oh yeah, it's set in the same universe, but it's expanding on it, and that's definitely one of the better of the legacy sequels. Now, it's still, kind of generic in an element, but at the same time, it's a bit more. It does something in terms of as a sequel to influence the world rather than the characters, which is still fun. Mary Poppins Returns. Jesus, I never watched it despite 54 years between the movies. I don't know if I'll ever watch Mary Poppins Returns, so I can't talk about it, sorry. Halloween, that's an interesting one as well. That one acts like it's a Top Gun level, legacy sequel, because it's like, oh, yeah, the continuity, fuck it. This is a direct sequel to the original. Now, that's a one that very few franchises have tried to be like, yeah, we're going to retcon everything and just start from scratch. Like, the new Texas Chainsaw did it. I think they're basically doing that for horror films now, because it's like, there's too much bullshit between the first Nightmare on Elm Street film and the 7th Nightmare on Elm Street film, especially when you include Freddy vs. Jason. So fuck all of that. Let's just do a direct sequel to the original. Now, that would be insane if they did a direct sequel to the original Nightmare on Elm Street, mostly because, I'm sorry, Dream Warriors was a classic. So, yeah, but still. Halloween 2018 that's a rare case of just wiping out all of the movies in between. But it still acts exactly as it is. It's a legacy sequel. It's interesting. What the fuck? Oh yeah, Glass. What a bizarre one to call a legacy sequel. I guess but Unbreakable came out in 2000. Glass coming out 19 years later is... I wouldn't really pin it as a legacy sequel, given how in between you had Split, and that wasn't really a legacy sequel. It was just a sequel set in the same universe. I don't know, that's a bizarre one. I mean, you can count it, sure. Still has the same creative vision, it still has the same actors, same characters, same world. I guess, sure. It's bizarre, but it works. I didn't personally like that film either, so it gave me a headache. Yeah, but no, Dr. Sleep is also a reference, of course, because it is amazing. And I really need to rewatch it. Bad Boys for Life, because the second one came out in 2003. See, that one's definitely a legacy sequel. Weirdly, despite the fact that I wouldn't pin Glass as a legacy sequel. I think just because Split came out so early before that, but that was a setup for a legacy sequel, a really long delayed sequel to finally give you the final finale trilogy-ish. In this case, you got Bad Boys for Life, which is the third of maybe 4 movies. I haven't seen Bad Boys for Life yet. I saw the first 2 back in maybe 2019. So I'm definitely interested to watch Bad Boys for Life at some stage. But yeah, so I can't comment on that, unfortunately. Ghostbusters Afterlife. Yeah, you remember the original Ghostbusters? What if we made a really shit, just jerked it off, and that's what the slime is? Anyway, I'm not going to watch that movie, probably ever. Matrix Resurrections. Interesting, given how, a lot of these legacy sequels being ones that, I guess 15 years is long enough. When you get shit like Top Gun, which is 30 years difference. Sure, I guess The Matrix Resurrections is technically a legacy sequel. It's in the meta of the narrative of the film, so I guess to some degree it makes sense. It's an interesting perspective. It's also a film that a lot of people didn't like because they wanted The Matrix. Instead, they got something completely different, which I liked a lot. and I can understand why a lot of people didn't like it. And it's not like I'm going to come into it being like, well, you just didn't understand. I'm like, look, I understand. Like, I know that you didn't understand what it was, and maybe you just don't appreciate what it was because you were hoping for The Matrix. And I understand that. The Matrix is a masterpiece. Maybe just stick with the original Matrix. If you don't like the sequels, don't bother with the fourth one, like, as a viewer. But yeah. And that's it. So, yeah, as an overall, Legacy sequels, interesting thing. It'll be interesting to see what they do next, given how you could make a sequel from anything. And trust me, people have. It's concerning. So, I guess we'll see, in the end, what comes out of all of this. That's all for now. I'm going to go do other stuff. And see you next time. What Legacy sequel is your favourite? Do you have a favourite? What do you think deserves a sequel and or prequel for a Legacy thingy? I know a lot of people want a fourth Back to the Future, but I'm like, yeah, nah, mate. So, yeah, let me know in those comments down below. See you next time. Adios. Ah.